Our next segment is a panel discussion on digital hatred, the polarization of identity politics. If you have any presence on social media, you can, in real time, see relationships deteriorate, friendships terminate. If you hold this position, if you support this candidate, if you patronize this business, you're part of the problem. So today we'll explore how this came about and how, as Christians, we can navigate this landscape. I'd like to introduce our panel this morning. First here to my left is Dr. Adam Fenner. Adam is the director of the Adventist Learning Community. He holds degrees from Andrews University, Stanford University, and American University. He's also served as a missionary to Honduras and worked for the independent ministry Pan American Health Service. Adam calls himself a product of Adventist education and thoroughly believes in the value of uniquely Adventist educational experience. He has been the true and lasting value, seen the true and lasting value of Adventist education and is committed to strengthening the system and that gave him the spiritual foundation and values he celebrates today. Will you please welcome Dr. Fenner. Next to him is Dr. Stephen Kabah. Dr. Stephen Kabah is a professor of communication and also teaches in the religion department at Oakwood University. He holds degrees, a Master's of Divinity degree, and also a Master of Business Administration and a PhD in communication. He is a member of and written papers for the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication and the Broadcast Education Association Conference. His principal research interests include mediatization, media effects, media ecology, digital media, and new media. His goal and passion in life is to bring awareness of the impact and effects of media on our culture today. He is also an ordained minister who has served congregations across the United States, Europe, and Africa. Will you please welcome Dr. Kabah. Next to him is Southern's very own Professor Alva Johnson, who is the Professor of Journalism and Communication. She joined Southern's faculty in the fall of 2018. Before joining academia, she served as a reporter for the Syracuse Post-Standard, the Omaha World Herald, and the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale. She studied journalism at Oakwood University and holds her bachelor's degree from there and earned her master's in public relations from Kent State University in Ohio. Her favorite quote is from Theodore Park, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Will you please welcome Southern's own Professor Alva Johnson. So with that, Professor Johnson, I'm going to start with you with this first question. Because, as I mentioned in my introduction, in our discourse, in everything from politics to religion to sports teams, we've just become so vitriolic, caustic, and polarized. So before we explore the why of this phenomenon, let's discuss how this happened. Do you, in your previous life as a journalist, do you see something in our history that served as a sentinel event to cause this polarization?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This is such an important conversation that we're having. And I first started seeing a lot of this when I was a reporter in South Florida, which you know is one of the most diverse areas of the country. I was part of a race and demographics team which covered the various immigrant groups that were changing the flavor of South Florida. And I was responsible for covering the growing Caribbean population. And one of the things that we noticed when we started going online with our articles was that it didn't matter what it was. If it was a car accident and there was a homicide, and you posted a story online, the comments that you would get, the vitriolic comments, negative comments people were making about immigrants, and we got to the point where we had to figure out how we were going to control that because the comments were so mean and nasty. And so that was like in the mid 2000s, and we saw that more and more. So this has really been a problem for quite a while, and it's been growing. In terms of what has happened, well, first of all, the sentiments were always there. Human beings are, we tend to be tribalistic by nature. We tend to think of our group as separate to others, and it's about self-preservation and putting people in the category of others. That has always existed. What's new is the technology which amplifies that. It used to be that we all watched the same news programs. You know, you had the 3 networks, we had our local newspapers that we read, but now, because of social media, the internet, we're very fragmented, and cable news. Cable news has had a big impact on that. So people are in echo chambers. You're able to choose what it is that you want to know, and you're not being as broad in terms of your media diet and as diverse. And so those things combine technology. Also, I would say that there's a lack of knowledge on the part of the consumers. There is a lack of media literacy that I'm seeing, and so that's a big concern.
And with that, just a follow-up to that, do you find that written journalism is kind of the last bastion of honest journalism? Because we see kind of this 24-hour news cycle of cable news, where it's just opining and commentary. And what are your thoughts as being a former?
Yes, I think we have lost our appreciation for our local newspapers. And I'm going to stress that because right now in our department, I am also the advisor for the Southern Accent. And we noticed, for example, that here in Collegedale, we have a news desert where there's city hall, there's government, and no one is covering it full time. So the school newspaper is now part of a national initiative out of the Center for Community News, out of the University of Vermont. And we are trying to enhance local news coverage. What people are talking about when they're talking about polarization, they're talking about what they're seeing on cable news.
Right.
But that really should not be your main news diet. Your local newspaper, the reporters there are working hard. They're actually going to City Hall and they are researching and investigating what's going on in your community. They're not people who are celebrities. They don't get a lot of money for what they do. They're passionate about the democracy. They're passionate about the First Amendment, which includes the free press, which is the only profession that is protected by our Constitution, because it's that important to our democracy. So yes, I do believe people should be supporting our local newspapers, and I hope that you'll do so.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Kabah, you also teach in this area. What are your observations about the polarization in media and digital media?
I think just to piggyback on what she has said, social media plays a huge role on this, especially when we talk of algorithm-driven content. What you find, especially in most social media platforms, is when you have algorithm-driven content that is prioritized, that evokes strong emotions, then there is high engagement. And you find this a lot in most social media platforms, and that creates a divisive situations. And I think also there is a commercial aspect on it, because when you have more engagements, when you have those strong feelings or emotions are shown on social media, then it's an opportunity also to advertise for most of these companies. And also something else that I would like to add on what she's saying, right now we have a very fragmented digital or media landscape. You know, back in the days, people just used to rely on traditional media, television and all that. But over the past couple of years, you're realizing a lot of people are getting news or information on social media. Now, like what we saw in the first presenter, most people are not fact-checking the sources they are getting information from. And so when you find posts on whether on Twitter or X or Facebook, most of the time, you will come across content that is very strong and very strong viewpoints. And so, because now we live in a country where people, some are on the far left, some are on the far right, you will find then there'll be that tension that exists. So social media is playing a very, very big role in the polarization that we are seeing today.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fenner.
Just to add to my two esteemed colleagues here, I think that one of the things that has contributed to the polarization is the speed of which we communicate. So for the vast majority of human history, it took a long time to actually communicate. It was a matter of writing a letter. Takes a long time. Sometimes that letter might take several weeks to get to where it needed to go. You even think about a phone call. That's actually a conversation between two people, maybe more. That takes time, and there's some opportunity for communication and even for people to kind of relax, get to know each other, communicate, and understand what the other person's talking about. But in the social media dialogue, it's all very public, and it's all very fast. And so that means that people who don't like to be wrong, which I think is just about everyone, have a public forum where if they appear to be wrong, or if they're attacked as being wrong, they don't have the time to slow down, they don't have the time to relax, the time to communicate in a meaningful fashion. It has to be right now. And the dangers of that are a myriad. Especially when we're talking about such vast amounts of information coming at us. To give you, for instance, in the early 1980s, we were, as a typical person in the United States, was bombarded by about 30 to 34,000 words a day. And we think about that, that's a lot of reading. That's quite a bit of words coming your way. But in the 21st century, we're looking at between 100 and 150,000 words at any given time per day. And so the average person can't actually filter that much stuff. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of knowledge. It's a lot of facts. And it's very stressful to us. And so when we're given something that doesn't necessarily agree with us in our echo chambers, you speak of algorithms, which is absolutely crucial here. When we're presented with something that doesn't agree with us, we have to push it away because we have so much information coming at us. If we don't, we'll become even more stressed. And so that puts us into our echo chambers, our confirmation biases, time and time again on just about every single issue.
Yeah, and I want to follow up with that because not only do we have polarization in our discourse, but now we have to filter through not just bias in our echo chambers and things, but misinformation and conspiracy theories and all that. I'll keep it with you, Dr. Fenner. How are we supposed to be conscientious consumers then with all that going on?
It's becoming harder and harder to be a conscientious consumer because of the algorithms that we face. I have this conversation with people who look at books and think of a book as being the absolute best. Well, it was written down, so it has to be true. That's not true, obviously. We've just listened to someone from the New York Times. It can be just as wrong as anything else. When you look at the internet, obviously journalistic standards are abysmal. Anybody can have a democratized version of the truth that they want. And we're living in a postmodern era where truth is really, it's not just relative, but your truth matters over anybody else's. So how do we become conscientious consumers in a world where we can't actually get good information? That's incredibly difficult because the sources of our information are so often biased themselves. And we have to recognize that. So I think that one of the best ways we can come at becoming a conscientious consumer and not actually falling into the trap of conspiracy theories is make sure that your social media algorithms are varied. Try to buck the system. A typical social media algorithm will know exactly who you are within 3 to 7 swipes. 3 to 7 swipes, it knows you better than you know yourself. And here's a challenge for you. In the morning, check your social media feed. Go to TikTok, go to YouTube Shorts, go to Twitter. It looks different than when you check it in the evening because it knows you like to consume certain kinds of information in the morning versus in the evening. So Typically, it's news in the morning, entertainment in the evening. Typically. So with that in mind, we have to say we actually have to like, and we have to swipe and spend more time on things that go against our predilections. So that means if you are right-wing, you need to listen and like left-wing things. If you are a Christian, that also means paying attention to atheist or agnostic or Muslim or whatever the case might be things, so that your algorithm is varied and will send you things that will break you out of your echo chamber.
I think also to add on that, it's very important to diversify your sources. I think because of algorithms, social media knows you very well, based on what platform you usually frequent, what you usually do there. And so if you're getting information on social media, it's very important to diversify your sources. Check other sources. Look what other platforms are saying. Look at traditional media. Go to websites and blogs and all that. I think that will be very, very helpful. Another thing, which is big on social media, there is a lot of emotional manipulation. Because if social media knows you really, really well, they know what ticks. They know what to give you. And so you may have content that makes you angry, and so you're always drawn to that content. So when you diversify sources, then you have a balanced view on what is presented. And so fact-checking also, these days, we live in a world of fact-checking. Just check if that source is credible, if the information is true, and all that. And then, and what Professor said here, digital literacy comes into play a lot.
So are you saying that it's not other human beings that are causing us to be polarized? It's actually robots? It's actually the algorithm?
Yeah, that's, algorithms are very interesting in the sense that you may be shocked how much a certain platform knows you. Or even we all carry our smartphones wherever we go. You may be talking of something and you see it pop. It's algorithm. And so all these platforms, then they will curate information based on you. It's just specific for you. What he sees on social media will be different from what I'm seeing, because they have known me very well. And so I'll be presented with news that I am into. So if you're on the left, then you'll be getting that kind of information. If you're on the right, then that's the kind of information that you'll have access to. If you're moderate, that's the kind of information that you'll be getting. So in a way, quote unquote, to confuse these algorithms, like what he said, just diversify your sources. Check it out. Check across board, and that will help you have a balanced view.
Professor Johnson.
Well, while I agree with both of my colleagues here, I want to push back a little bit in that I think we play a role. We know that there are the algorithms and everything that's going on, but we, as the consumers, are too passive. We have to determine in our hearts that we desire to know the truth. That's where it starts. And sometimes we don't really want to know the truth. The truth can be inconvenient. It may mean I have to make a decision. It may mean I have to change political parties or not belong to any political party. So sometimes what I find is that people don't really want to know the truth. We want to know the truth when it comes to prophecy. Come on. Come on. We are a people of truth, and yet we will support things that are going on in our society when we know they are outright lies. And I want you to know, as a professor, your children are watching. They see the disconnect. If we believe in truth, we have to first of all want to stand for truth wherever, even in the political arena. The second thing I'll add is we need to learn to detect bias. I'm finding that people really don't know the difference between opinion and fact. And so when we are exposed to new content, new information, we should be asking questions. Critical thinking skills, so important. So while I agree that, the technology is there and the tech companies are doing all they can to make money from us. We as the consumers need to realize we have more power than we think. And we have to determine that we want to know the truth. And that's what we need to be seeking.
Yeah, and I want to go off of that because I had an experience on social media that I shared in Liberty Magazine a couple issues ago, where my content was regulated and my account was suspended because of something I posted. It's something I thought was rather benign. And I thought, well, what an injustice! What a violation of my freedom to express myself. When actually, when I stepped back, I said, I'm playing in, I'm in their sandbox. I'm in Mr. Zuckerberg's playground. So I have to play by his rules, right? So I want to ask, and actually we'll go to you, Dr. Fenner. Since social media has become so critical in our dissemination and consumerism of information, what are your thoughts about content moderation? And are they so much part of the public trust where we now have kind of First Amendment issues with them, or are we really just in their playground? Are we in Elon Musk's playground? Are we in Zuckerberg's playground, and we just have to play by their rules?
Yeah, one of Mark Zuckerberg's former colleagues at Meta once said that Mark Zuckerberg has godlike power. And what does that mean? It means that through algorithms and the decision-making process of Facebook, now Meta, that Mark and his team could essentially dictate what people are seeing. And that gets to the point of what is truth. Well, if your truth is manipulated and your source is manipulated, your truth is going to be slightly varied. And it's so insidious that even if, let's say, the powers that be, now Elon Musk at X, or Instagram, or TikTok, that they want to change 1% of your direction and what kind of truth that you're getting, over time, that will throw you off kilter in a major way. So they might throw information at you that's just slightly off from what you're used to. And over time, that's going to take you way off to the right or way off to the left. And what's really scary is not only on social media that this is happening, but with artificial intelligence now, the fastest adopted technology ever to be in human existence. And if you have the programmers of an AI give you a certain context within, when you use that AI, the AI will only give you information that the programmers want, just like social media. And so the danger is that there are people in Silicon Valley, not the federal government, that are determining what your truth is, what your reality is. And that's terrifying. The issue that I have here is that who gets to define what that truth is? Because it's always really great. Freedom of speech is wonderful, and hate speech is horrible, let's be honest. It's very detrimental, particularly to marginalized groups. But what about when that hate speech is against you? And what about when that hate speech is directed at the Bible, so that the Bible is labeled hate speech? And right now, in many places, that is an issue. In fact, I know many Adventist websites that have been taken down. Many of my videos have been taken down because they're labeled as hate speech. All I'm doing is quoting the Bible. So in that situation, we have to be very, very careful that, no, the federal government's not doing this. It is the algorithms on the social media platforms that are doing this. It is the AIs that are doing this. And so we need to be conscientious consumers, and like my colleague said, make sure that we're getting our information from a variety of sources.
What are you telling your students?
I think he's very right on that, especially, when we talk of the First Amendment. Here, we are talking of private companies and government entities. Now, when we talk of private companies, these social media companies are private entities. And so they have a right to flag or remove some content that you may have posted on social media, like the example you gave. And When they do that, they are not in direct violation of the First Amendment because they have a moral obligation, they have the standards and practices of the company.
Right.
And so they can just flag it. But at the same time, though algorithms now run things and now add AI, I feel like also they have a moral obligation or responsibility to provide space for free dialogue and discourse, because you will find a lot of discussions are happening on social media platforms and stuff like that. And studies are showing, I teach a social media class at Oakwood, and most people are relying on social media for news. But at the same time, people have different social media platforms where they go for the particular news that they're looking for. Now, think of Twitter or X, so to speak. Now, these social media platforms also, they have their own perspectives of worldview. They can lean right, they can lean left. And so, depending on our perspective or where we lean, we tend to really go to these platforms. And so, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to know that these platforms, they know us pretty well, but also we have to have discernment to know, okay, this is truth, and sometimes we are not even interested, like what she said, we are not interested in truth, but we have that responsibility to educate ourselves on how these different media platforms are working.
Well, certainly the technology has evolved at a much more rapid pace than the laws and the rules to regulate it, unfortunately. And people are so accustomed now to being on these platforms and just expressing themselves in any way. And there's always a concern about censorship. Who are you going to regulate? And there is some pushback on that in some of the cases now that are coming out of Texas and Florida. So this is a really tricky situation. It's one of the problems we have with the democracy. But you have to have some boundaries, right? That's why we have red lights. That's why we have laws that protect our safety. We haven't been as diligent as we should have been with what's going on online. And so I'm hoping that we will have some regulations passed soon.
In the last 15 years, when we talk about the digital world and how we frame it and how we regulate it, one thing has become very apparent, and that is that it's moving faster than the ability of the regulators to regulate it. And it's only going to increase in speed with the advent of AI. And so I don't see, I'm not optimistic for our ability to actually get a handle on it anytime soon. It's a kind of a scary thing, so it really speaks to individual responsibility. But with that said, how does an individual actually access truth in the 21st century? How do you do it? Do you get it at universities? Do you get it on your social media feed? Do you get it in books or newspapers? All of them have biases. Every one of them is incredibly biased. Back in the 80s, and before then, before the FCC changed its regulation, and I think it was 1987, the nightly news had to be fair and balanced, giving both sides of things. But with the advent of, say, CNN and Fox News, suddenly you have ideological viewpoints on news itself. That translates across the spectrum now. There has never been a more difficult time to actually access the truth.
Go ahead.
Something else that I wanted to mention is when we talk of First Amendment and freedom of speech and stuff like that, when you look at these social media platforms, they are global. These are global companies. Social media is all over the world. But when we talk of First Amendment, it's just specific to the United States. So what may be a violation of First Amendment here may not be a violation in another country. So we find ourselves in a very, very complex situation when we are talking about freedom of speech and the First Amendment.
And I want to just a straw poll. How many of you think that our social media companies need some sort of government regulation? There's been talk about turning them into almost like public utility companies, where you kind of have a public-private partnership. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I think that there should be some regulation. Are we taking a poll?
No, go ahead, guys.
I'm totally against it.
All right, Dr. Kabah.
I think it's a very tricky question to answer. Already social media platforms are protected by Section 230. And so they are not really regarded like publishers where whatever you publish, you're responsible for that. Social media, these companies are protected with that. And so that's why they can do whatever they want. They can flag you. They can remove your content and stuff like that. So I don't know how more regulation would look like, because this is a global phenomenon. This is social media is all over the world. So if there is regulation in the United States of America, how does it look in another country? So I see it as a very complex situation when we talk of regulation.
Yeah.
I wanted to just touch on this issue about whether or not there is unbiased news that we can access. I truly believe, having worked in about 4 or 5, probably about 5 newsrooms across the country, that most of your local newspapers are doing their very best to get the the best obtainable version of the truth, okay? We go out of our way to verify information to the point where the spelling of a person's name, when we teach journalism classes, the very first thing you ask is, what is the spelling of your first and last name? I don't care if the name is Mary. And if you didn't get it, you call back. That's how we operate in the newsrooms. So there are trusted sources out there. You just have to be diligent about making sure you find a trusted source. And the issue of bias, all of us have biases. When I was in the newsroom, I had a bias. I'm a Black woman. My parents are Caribbean immigrants, okay? And I'm Seventh-day Adventist. I'm religious. I have a bias, but I have to learn to control those biases. And what I do is, when I am doing a story, I try to be balanced. I try to speak to people from various perspectives. And that's what most news reporters do. So I would look for those news sources, and most of them are just your local newspaper where that type of reporting is going on.
I got a couple of text messages from, I think, presumably people in this room. What did I say on Facebook that got me suspended? Okay, so I'll tell you the story. This actually was during the COVID outbreak, and someone posted a story, actually a scholarly article on the origin of COVID and the Wuhan wet market and things. And so, being of Chinese heritage, I put in the comments, I enjoyed my bat for breakfast this morning. Within 30 seconds, I saw the little flag window come up and say, your account has been temporarily suspended pending review of your post, and there is no appeal. And I thought, well, what a silly ticky-tack thing to suspend me over about, commenting about a bat. But I decided to take it because I'm in Zuckerberg's sandbox, and it's his rules. But I want to bring this to a close, and so we'll start with you, Professor Johnson, and go to Dr. Kabah and end with Dr. Fenner. Let's bring it home to us as Seventh-day Adventist Christians. How can we effectively participate and engage, and as Dr. English said, practice Micah of practicing justice, love mercy, and walk humbly? How do we do that in this landscape of digital media?
Well, I think we have to carry Christ with us wherever we go, not just to church. If you're on social media, carry Christ with you. Be gentle in the way you deal with others. Stop demonizing people. Stop demonizing people. They're not your enemy. We're all in this together. And if we stop seeing people as our enemies and we start dialoguing with people, and one of the highly effective habits of people, one of the habits of highly effective people is to seek first to understand. Seek first to understand before we jump to conclusions. So ask questions. Be curious about other people. I would encourage people to step outside of your comfort zone. That's what I encourage the students to do. Talk to people, get out of your little bubble. And I was forced to do that as a journalist. That's why I have a different perspective. When I'm dealing with Adventists, I find a lot of times that they find it difficult to look at situations from different angles. I was forced to do that because I was thrown out there. And yes, I spoke to people on both sides of the aisle, the person who's pro-life and the person who's pro-choice, the Catholic and the Adventist. Okay? You have to get out there and mingle with people so that you could understand them. And is that not what Christ did? So that's my recommendation.
One thing that I would really, really emphasize, and we've talked about it here, is media literacy. You will find as a church, I don't think we have programs where we are educating ourselves and our children on media literacy, on media effects and media environments. I think if we would have these programs all over, I think we would go a great way. There was one scholar, Neil Postman, he said, we live in a society where we have surrendered ourselves to technology. I mean, it's like we cannot survive without technology. We depend on technology day in, day out. So this calls for us to develop media literacy programs because technology is not going away. It's going to be here. In fact, it's going to get more intense. So as a church, I think we have that responsibility to educate people, to educate ourselves, and to educate people who are surrounding us about media and media environments.
Now, before we go on to Dr. Fenner, being the theologian on the panel, I want to talk to you about I want to ask you about this concept of humility, because I think a lot of us grew up with this concept of humility as, well, I'm just so, I'm so low, I'm not deserving, and kind of, when it comes to being humble in interacting with each other, it is meaning having an open mind and being receptive to another point of view. But I would even suggest that being humble also means viewing the other person as your moral and intellectual equal, which is kind of hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. If I'm going to look at someone else's point of view and view them as my moral and intellectual equal, that is true humility. Give us your take on humility.
Yeah. And the thing is that as human beings, we approach things with presuppositions. We come with presuppositions. And so if you have a worldview that I don't really agree with, and it's because I'm approaching it with already my beliefs, my pre-existing beliefs, then I have a hard time trying to have an open mind. Right. And so I think it's important for each one of us, in spite of our presuppositions that we have an open mind, to have an opportunity to embrace and understand different views. I think that is also very key and important as we try to understand media environments.
Yeah, because if we don't take a humble approach, two things can happen. One, it makes it easy to dismiss them, right? I mean, we just say, but it also makes it easy to correct them. You're wrong, and let me tell you why, right? How many times we've seen that and done that? Dr. Fenner.
This is a very difficult and important topic. First off, I'd say that we are all called to be ministers. This idea that Just if you only have a platform, if you're a pastor or you're an evangelist or a teacher or a professor, whatever, then you have a platform and then you need to deal with this. It's actually everybody. We're all called to be ministers for Christ, and we're all called to be his ambassadors. And he makes his appeal through us, which is very humbling in and of itself. And rather than talk about philosophy, I think here, or kind of give an exegesis on humility, I think I'll talk about techniques. One is, when you are online, slow down. Slow down. There's no need to rush. If you notice, how often do you change your mind? When's the last time you actually changed your mind on something? It takes years, usually, for big issues. And social media is not, and the internet in general, is not nuanced. Difficult conversations, important issues are extremely nuanced. It's not black and white, it's extremely gray. And these things will take time. Therefore, don't try to change someone's life in a tweet. It's not gonna happen. The only thing you're gonna do is alienate people. So slowing down is really key. Another thing is like, know your platform. So Twitter, I think we can all agree it's an area where it's pretty bloody. I mean, people get their noses bloodied a lot on Twitter. It's a pithy, short platform. Instagram is very visually oriented. Photographs and reels are there. And TikTok's a slightly shorter version of a documentary. YouTube Shorts is even shorter than that. YouTube is long form video. All of them have their different audiences. All of them have their certain strengths and weaknesses. If you were engaging on one of those platforms and you were posting or you were interacting with someone, know your limitations. Know what you can and cannot accomplish there. Another thing I would say is do a social media inventory. Actually go back and look at your posts and say, what am I accomplishing here? Evaluate yourself and try to improve upon it later on. Am I changing the world, or am I pushing people further away from Christ? That's a big one. And the other thing is that trust the Spirit. The Spirit transforms hearts and minds. We don't do it. We get to participate in that, but trust that good things will happen when you turn it over to the Spirit.
Amen. John, do we have questions?
Yes, we do have a number of questions from the audience, but there is a conflict between those questions and lunch. And so I decided to select the most provocative question.
There we go.
that I could find. And the question, this is the question. What positive contribution has the media, both social and the regular media, made to the preservation of our democracy?
Professor Johnson.
Oh, I love that question. Because there would be no democracy without the media, the free press. When we think of the First Amendment, there are 5 freedoms. Okay, a lot of times as Adventists, we focus on the freedom of religion, but there's also freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to peaceably assemble and petition the government, right, for a redress of grievances. All of those freedoms matter. And if you take away one, you have a problem. Think about the free press and the publishing work that we have in our church. Think about the free speech and the fact that if we want to say that the United States is a lamb-like beast in our prophecy seminars, we can say that in this country because of that First Amendment. When COVID came into this country, we didn't see COVID. It snuck in here. How do most of you know? How do I know? I read it in the newspaper. I saw it on the news. 9/11, most of us weren't there. How do we find about it? Who's covering these things? So we have to there needs to be a new appreciation for the work that journalists are doing. Look at what's going on over in Israel. Journalists putting their lives on the line to be there covering it. They have preserved this democracy. And I'm going to throw this out too. The reporting that they did during the presidency of President Trump helped to preserve this democracy. So we need to really rethink whether or not the press is the enemy of the people or is it a friend of democracy. And I will argue that it is a friend of democracy. It's not perfect, but it is a friend of democracy.
You know, social media and democracy, I think what social media did, it gave everyone a voice, even those who did not have. Though there is a lot that happens on social media. But at the same time, if you look on the flip of it, there is what we call the mediatization of politics, where what we are seeing today is that social media has become a platform of politicians to share their views, to share their political ideologies and stuff like that. So in one way, you may say, well, social media plays a huge role in preservation of democracy. At the same time, like what we have been discussing here, it's a place, if you're not really careful on discerning what you're reading or what you're accessing on social media, then it may be not a too good place to be.
I was hoping that we'd run out of time because I don't want to answer this question. I'll just say, I don't have too much, I love, don't get me wrong, we have to have a strong press in this country for democracy to work. Absolutely. Are we beyond the point of no return? Read the book Revelation.
I want to close with this, and this is from Paul's letter to Ephesians, who is addressing them that are having a political spat in the church of Ephesus, and he writes this: "As a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling that you have received. Be completely humble, gentle, patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. For there is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, and one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." Will you join me in thanking our panelists today?